The 40th year of my marriage to Michael Dawson, I died suddenly from overwork. For 40 years I had taken care of his mother, who had been paralyzed for 35 of them, and I raised our son into adulthood. My only wish before I passed was to be buried beside my parents. But the very next day, my body was donated by Charles Wu to the research institute where Michael's first love worked. Two people in their 50s stood before my shriveled, naked corpse, holding each other and kissing with deep affection. "If it hadn't been for her," she said, "we wouldn't have missed out on all these years." "Well," he replied, "at least she raised our child for us, and now she's given you her body for research. I guess that makes up for a tiny part of our mistakes." "Too bad," she whispered. "The youth we lost is something we can never get back." Their so-called youth was the very life I had lived for half a lifetime. As my soul floated toward the heavens, I felt an unbearable pain piercing my heart. When I opened my eyes, it was the day no one had come to the house. A young Michael Dawson stood before me, his face cold just as I remembered. "You'll bring a dowry, help pay for my schooling, and take care of my mother," he said. "If I marry you, that's a blessing. Once you marry into the family, you'll have to serve my mother-in-law well and look after Michael Dawson. After all, he's the only high school graduate in the village, and he'll probably be the only one to ever get into college. Lisa Miller, this is your responsibility now." No one was smiling. They just tightly clasped Michael's hand with mine. Even in that moment of chaos, his resistance was unmistakably real. But wait, I had died, hadn't I? Panicked, I looked around. The glass window was crowded with nosy neighbors, pressed up to see the commotion. Among them was one young face. It was my own, at 19 years old. I had returned to the day I was engaged to Michael Dawson. "You're not very educated," he said. "We're not on the same level, we don't really have anything in common. To be honest, you're not a good match for me. I'm only agreeing to marry you because you seem obedient enough. Most of the time, I have to attend classes in the county. After we get married, you'll stay home and take care of my mom. All her food ration coupons will go to me. Your rations, make sure my mom eats first." The face of Michael Dawson from my previous life and the face before me now overlapped. His voice echoed in my ears. I jerked my hand away as if I had been electrocuted. "Who says I want to marry you?" I snapped. No one had ever resisted me like that before. Startled, he flinched and muttered, "Hey now." The whole room and courtyard, packed with villagers, burst into laughter. "Oh, the bride's getting shy now. She used to run over to the Dawson house all the time, and now she's acting all bashful. It's the new era, free love. No one's going to judge you." "Lisa, you hit the jackpot. Michael is the only educated one in the whole village. In my previous life, I had once fallen into the river, and Michael Dawson had saved me. I felt deeply indebted to him, and did everything I could to repay him. I handed over state-owned electric snacks I couldn't even bear to eat to his mother, one pack after another. I traded for cloth coupons to make him new clothes while I wore old, patched-up rough fabric. His mother saw how quick I was with housework, how mild my temper was, and how I brought a dowry with me. She insisted I give myself to Michael in marriage. "He's a good boy," she said. "He got sick from saving you, had a fever, and even missed classes for several days. And besides, everyone knows he brought you back with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. If you don't marry Michael, no one else will take you. A girl staying at home too long, your dead parents won't rest in peace." Coaxed and pressured, before I even understood what marriage meant, I was dragged into the Dawson family. I worked like a beast of burden for 40 years, only to be toyed with and betrayed in the end. Now that fate has given me a second chance, there's no way I'll repeat the same mistakes. "My mom said, 'Pack your things and come over today,'" Michael told me. "I've got classes, no time for a wedding feast." Just like in my past life, he had no patience, ordering the villagers to help move the dowry. When my parents were alive, they were hard-working and had saved quite a bit of wealth. With that dowry, Michael, who came from a poor family, was able to finish high school and get into college. After graduating, he landed a job in a government agency and climbed the ranks with ease. Everyone bustled around, helping move things. In my past life, I had stumbled into this marriage in a daze. There wasn't even a wedding, not even a single red decoration. I used to think Michael Dawson was just someone who didn't understand romance. But 2 months after my death, he held a grand wedding to marry Emily Sullivan. He personally designed every detail of the ceremony and even shed tears multiple times throughout the event. Back then, marriage was just about getting through life together. It didn't matter who you were with. Everything felt tasteless. Until the day he married Emily. Only then did I understand what it meant to find happiness too late. In this life, I will never again stand in the way of his happiness. When I saw everyone getting ready to move the dowry, I quickly stepped forward to stop them. "Put everything down," I said. The helpers hesitated, casting confused glances at me. Michael Dawson was visibly irritated. "Enough, Lisa Miller. Don't tell me you just want everyone to carry your things out piece by piece so they can see how much dowry you brought. We're all working-class folks. You're just flaunting your parents' hard-earned money. What's there to show off, as if I'm marrying you because of your dowry?" He sneered. "Let me tell you, if you and my mother hadn't clung to me like leeches, I would never marry a barely literate girl like you." His crisp, new army green trousers, hands shoved arrogantly in the pockets, were the very ones I had stayed up all night sewing for him, trading what little I had for a lamp, just so I could finish them. In my past life, it was the same. He used my things and still had the audacity to insult me, but now, having lived through another lifetime, I had 40 years of being deceived to reflect on. I was no longer the timid Lisa Miller who couldn't speak up. I lifted my head to meet his smug gaze, crossed my arms and said with a calm but clear voice, "If you're not marrying me, good, because I wasn't planning on marrying you either." As soon as the words left my mouth, everyone around us froze in shock. After all, in my previous life, I had constantly run to the Dawson household, and thanks to his mother's embellished gossip, the entire village believed I had desperately clung to Michael, forcing myself into his life. Other girls my age had suitors lined up at their doors, while I was ignored because everyone thought I was already taken. Now, I pressed down the chair they had tried to lift me onto, cleared my throat, and addressed him directly. "Michael Dawson, I used to help out at your house because I was grateful you saved me. Later, your mother said your family was too poor to afford your tuition and begged me to bring a dowry so you could stay in school. I agreed, reluctantly, as a way to repay that favor. But now that you look down on me and my dowry, well, that's perfect. I won't bother trying to climb a tree that's too high for me. From now on, we go our separate ways. You stay in your lane, and I'll stay in mine. Let's keep things clean between us." My voice rang out, clear and bright. Ignoring Michael's darkening expression, I turned to the crowd, clapped my hands together, and said, "Sorry for troubling everyone today. I've made up my mind, and I won't make anyone feel awkward. I, Lisa Miller, don't let others suffer because of my problems. Right now, I'm going to buy meat and cook. Everyone come over tonight. We'll treat it like a celebration of my rebirth." I paused deliberately, then added with extra emphasis, "If there's any hard-working man out there who doesn't go around begging others for help, I hope all the aunties will keep an eye out for me." I stared hard at Michael as I stressed the part about not begging others. At heart, I'd always been free-spirited. In my past life, I became meek and submissive only because of Michael's constant humiliation and belittling, which had worn down my confidence. But this time, I was determined to pull myself out of the mud. Michael Dawson would never again speak nonsense to my face. While everyone was still waiting to see how Michael would respond, I had already slammed the door and sent him packing. What I didn't expect was that Michael suddenly flew into a rage. "Lisa Miller, what game are you playing? How could you possibly not want to marry me?" I rolled my eyes at him. "What are you, some rare gem? You look like a skinny little chicken. What's there to want?" At this point in time, Michael hadn't reached any high position. He was nothing more than a frail student living off others' generosity. Amidst the noise and chaos, his face flushed deep red. "Lisa Miller, don't act so high and mighty. You gave up a kidney for me." He abruptly cut himself off, but my heart dropped. In our past life, Michael had been diagnosed with kidney disease. Back then, organ transplant technology wasn't very advanced, but we were a match, and I hadn't hesitated to donate my kidney to save him. After the surgery, I ignored my own health and took care of him, day and night. Because of the missing kidney and all that exhaustion, I developed chronic health problems. But now, how does he know about that? His sudden avoidance, the flicker in his eyes, sparked a bold suspicion in me. Michael Dawson had also been reborn. My fists clenched instinctively. He had come back too, and he still wanted to drag me back into that pit of hell? What did you just say? I asked, raising my voice slightly. I didn't quite catch that. What, now that you've declared your disdain, you want to take it all back and marry me after all? Michael stared at me, his expression quickly morphing back into arrogance. He let out a cold snort. Oh, I see how it is. Playing reverse psychology now? Trying to retreat just to move forward? Hoping to get me angry enough to insist on marrying you so you won't look like you're the one chasing me. Using a trick like this to provoke me. How clever. He narrowed his eyes. Well, let me make it clear right now, Lisa Miller. If you think I'll ever lower my head for you, think again. It's never gonna happen. If you want to marry me, you'd better surrender now. Otherwise, once I walk out that door, even if you kneel and beg, Michael Dawson didn't get to finish his sentence before I chased him out of the yard with a broom. What filth! What bad luck, I muttered. As he left, Michael gritted his teeth and hissed, Fine, Lisa Miller. This is your choice. Just wait till I make it big. When I'm surrounded by power and status, you'll be crying so hard you won't even be able to speak. That night, I set up banquet tables in the courtyard to treat the villagers. My parents passed away early, and I had no siblings. Over the years, the people of this village had helped me with countless, big and small things. At the table, some close friends tried to persuade me. Lisa, I know Michael's got a bit of a temper, but he really is one of the few promising young men around here. He might really get into college and make a name for himself one day. Don't let your anger steer you down the wrong path. You've vented. That's enough. Why don't we go talk to his mom with you and apologize? I heard there's a girl at his school he's pretty close to. It had been the same in my past life. Even though I had given half my life to the Dawson family, in the end, everyone said I was lucky to have chosen the right man. The wine they offered tasted extra bitter tonight. I thought to myself, even if I never get married in this lifetime, I'll never marry Michael Dawson. I swallowed the liquor and said firmly, This life, I'm going to live for myself. Just as we were eating and laughing, the front door slammed open with force. Of course, a girl with no parents has no manners. Starting the banquet without waiting for me, a shrill voice rang out. Mrs. Dawson burst in like she owned the place, exactly the way she had in my past life. She instantly took over, greeting everyone like the host. Today's a joyous day for the Dawson family. Everyone, eat and drink to your heart's content. If the chives run out, call someone to bring more. Our family has always been scholarly and well-mannered. Shame on me for not raising a well-bred daughter-in-law. Please don't laugh at us. Michael's father had once been the village accountant, but he died drunk in the grain warehouse. Mrs. Dawson told everyone he had died in service. She always had a way of twisting the truth. Now she raised her voice again, calling out to me. Lisa, I gave you money so you could treat the villagers, and what do? Stuff your face without even inviting me. Once you join the Dawson family, you're no longer a child. You keep acting like this and people will laugh at you. She leaned in and whispered, I used to think you were a sensible girl. What's gotten into you, acting all wild? Since this is your first offense, I won't hold it against you. But in a bit, you'll come back with me. Apologize to Michael. Get on your knees and serve him tea. I'll still consider you part of the Dawson family. Otherwise, don't blame me if no one ever marries you. When I didn't move, she slammed her hand hard on my back. Are you deaf when your elders speak? Get up. Since when does the new bride get to sit while guests haven't even been served? She snatched the cup from my hand. My son is going to be a big official one day. Drinking damages the brain. He can't drink. I'll drink on behalf of the Dawson family. If we've failed to entertain, please forgive us. Her little performance left everyone stunned. So it was Mrs. Dawson who paid and Lisa who did the work? Why didn't the girl just say so earlier? Someone whispered. After that argument this morning, I really thought she wasn't going to marry him. Turns out she just wanted to save face for herself. Lisa, that's not right. Hurry and give your mother-in-law your seat. In my past life, I hadn't even had a proper wedding when I married into the Dawson family, yet Mrs. Dawson still went around collecting wedding gifts from everyone. The next morning, Michael left early for school in the county while I handled everything alone. Using my own dowry, I prepared chives and other dishes to thank the guests. When the meal started, Mrs. Dawson took a few casual words and made it sound like she had done all the work. The men smoked. The women and kids filled their pockets with sunflower seeds and candy. Everyone in the village praised Michael Dawson. I hosted the banquet and upheld their reputation, while Mrs. Dawson scolded me for spending too much and wasting money. She even stopped me from eating, saying it was to save the guests' portions. I knelt by the door, bowing to everyone who came and went. She told me, "A man never kneels, his wife kneels for him. That's a wife's duty. Obeying your mother-in-law and honoring your husband is the rule of the Dawson family." The next day, my knees were so swollen they looked like two big red buns, and I still had to go out and work in the fields, take care of the house. All of my dowry was taken by Mrs. Dawson under the excuse of safekeeping. Even when I was pregnant and just wanted to eat a single egg, she accused me of being greedy. Old grievances stacked upon new ones. But what I hated the most, what made me want to tear her to pieces, was that in my past life she caused the death of my child. Middle-aged Mrs. Dawson was especially shrewish and hot-tempered. 5 years into my marriage to Michael, she suffered a stroke and was bedridden for over 30 years. Later, when Michael's career took off, he thought I was useless and tried multiple times to divorce me. It was Mrs. Dawson who insisted on keeping me around. "I was the one who let Lisa in the door," she said. "You're busy with work. All these years, it's been Lisa who stayed by my side. As long as I'm alive, don't even think about her leaving this house." That's what Mrs. Dawson used to say. Back then, I thought she was just sharp-tongued but soft-hearted. For over 30 years, I cleaned her bedpans, cared for her, and watched over her until her final breath. But in her dying moments, she pushed me aside, took Michael's hand in one of hers and Emily Sullivan's in the other, and said, "I'm sorry, my son. I was the one who insisted on you marrying Lisa, but I had no choice. If it weren't for that dowry, how would you two have gone to college? Later, I became useless, bedridden for years, and I didn't want you two to suffer. That's why I let Lisa take the spot as your wife. Please forgive me. I even swapped out my own biological grandchild for the girl Lisa gave birth to. For that alone, let me go in peace." I had just returned with a bowl of chicken soup when I saw it, Mrs. Dawson holding my son, the one I had raised with all my heart, and making him call Emily Mom. It was then that I realized the child I had given birth to was actually a girl. But that baby girl, barely a day old, had been taken by her own grandmother and thrown into the back hills, fed to the wolves. I rushed in to confront her, but before I could say a word, she took her last breath. "I'm calling the police," I cried, but Michael slapped me hard across the face. "Lisa Miller, how dare you accuse my mother after driving her to her death?" My body was already frail, and with the emotional blow, I collapsed to the ground and never got up again. Seeing my enemies again filled me with rage, and Mrs. Dawson still had the nerve to act like a proper mother-in-law in front of me. I snatched the wine cup from her hand and smashed it on the floor. "Auntie Dawson, if you've got nothing to eat at home and just came here to mooch some meat, you could have just said so. No one would have laughed at you. But don't come here making up nonsense. I'm not part of your Dawson family anymore." "Everyone knows what a loving mother you are," I continued. "Gave your food ration coupons to Michael, huh? So where did you get the extra coupons to pay for this banquet?" Thanks to my reminder, the villagers finally started to understand. Mrs. Dawson always bragged about raising a child on her own, saying things like, "What's it matter if an old woman like me eats or not? Just don't let the country's future star go hungry." I exposed her lies and laughed coldly. "If you're hungry and craving meat, just say so. I'll give you a bite. You don't need to put on this show." It was the first time I had ever stood up to Mrs. Dawson. She froze in place, then instinctively raised her hand to strike me, but seeing the watching crowd, her eyes darted. Instead of slapping me, she wailed loudly and dropped to the ground. "What kind of fate is this? My daughter-in-law just entered the family, and now she's scolding her mother-in-law. Villagers, you be the judge. My son risked his life to save this ungrateful girl. And now, at my age, I'm being insulted by this little tramp. I don't want to live anymore." With that, she threw herself at me, her head slamming into my chest so hard it made my organs churn. In my past life, when she was bedridden, she would dump cold or hot water on me just because something displeased her. But I wasn't putting up with her anymore. I raised my knee and struck her square in the nose. She let go instantly, clutching her bleeding nose in pain. Right then, Michael walked in and saw the scene. Without hesitation, he slapped me so hard I hit the floor. "You uncultured slut," he roared. "You dare hit your mother-in-law? May lightning strike you down." I spat a mouthful of bloody saliva into his face and stared him down. "Michael Dawson, stop dreaming. Even if I never marry another man in my life, I will never marry you. If you keep trying to ruin my name, I'll report you for sexual harassment." Mrs. Dawson wiped the blood from her nose, her eyes full of malice. "Fine, Lisa Miller. You brought this on yourself? You think you're so clever? I'll make sure everyone sees who you really are. You want to know the truth, villagers? I didn't want to say this before, but now I have no choice. Lisa Miller pretends to be pure, but the day my son saved her from drowning, she had just finished sleeping with some man out in the fields. That's why her legs gave out and she slipped into the river. She's nothing but a filthy whore." It was like thunder had cracked the sky. The flood of gossip drowned me. No matter the era, a woman's chastity is always a weapon used against her. A single lie can destroy a life. And yet, I couldn't prove anything. In both lives, the Dawsons wanted me dead. I wiped the blood from my lips and stared directly into Michael's eyes. "Michael Dawson," I said, "you swear you have a conscience. Tell me the truth, what really happened when I fell into the river." The women around us began to speak up. "Michael, is what your mom said true? This is a matter of life and death for a woman. Don't ruin Lisa's life over a grudge." Michael was clearly shaken. Under my gaze, guilt flickered across his face. But still, he gritted his teeth and said, "Lisa Miller." "This is what you deserve," Michael said. "But if you're truly sorry and willing to change, I can be the bigger person. I'll take you back, even if you're damaged goods." People around us saw his serious expression and mistook it for responsibility, some even looking at him with sympathy and admiration. Mrs. Dawson curled her lip and scoffed. "Once everyone's finished eating, help us move the dowry into our house, and after today, I'd appreciate it if you could all help me keep an eye on Lisa Miller. This shameless girl who clearly has no morals. Let's make sure she doesn't go around hooking up with random men while my son's not home." Michael came over and grabbed my wrist. "Lisa Miller, I'm willing to give you one more chance to start over." But right then, a distant rumbling of wheels broke the silence. A beam of headlights lit up the courtyard. I let out a cold laugh. Too late. A military green truck pulled up in front of my house. Several sharp-eyed female soldiers jumped out from the back. From the passenger seat climbed out a local boy, little Timmy, only 13 years old. "Lisa, I didn't mess it up, right?" I stuffed a huge handful of candy into his hands and gave him a thumbs up. "You're a lifesaver." The female soldiers quickly recognized me. "Comrade, thank goodness you're safe." The villagers looked confused, but Michael's face went ghostly pale. He muttered to himself, "No, impossible. How could they know?" Panicking, he lunged toward me, trying to pull me aside. "Lisa, I've changed my mind. I want to marry you. Let's do it. Let's get married right now." Before I could respond, one of the female soldiers shoved him back. "Sir, why are you putting your hands on this comrade? Wait, you're the guy we handed her over to that day, right?" Seeing everyone's puzzled expressions, I finally spoke the truth. The person who saved me was never Michael Dawson. It was these female soldiers passing by on assignment. I had only found this out after my death in the previous life. When I was preparing the chive dishes, I had sent Timmy, relying on memories from my past life, with a letter explaining my situation and begging them to help expose the truth. The military camp wasn't far, just in the nearby town. As soon as they got the letter, they came right away. One of the women said, "We were on a mission that day and couldn't stop long. We pulled Lisa Miller from the water, and since this man said he was from the same village, we handed her over to him." Gasps rippled through the crowd. So it was the female soldiers who rescued Lisa? Michael, why did you say you were the one who saved her? Michael stammered, unable to respond. Mrs. Dawson quickly stepped in front of the crowd. Even if those girls pulled her out of the water, it was my son who gave her mouth to mouth. Otherwise, she would have died. You all saw him save her with your own eyes. The villagers looked confused again. They did remember seeing Michael yell for help and perform CPR. But one of the soldiers frowned and said, "That's not right. When we pulled Lisa Miller out of the river, we already performed chest compressions and cleared her lungs. She didn't need mouth-to-mouth at all." Mrs. Dawson sneered at them. "What do you little girls know? My son is a college student." The female soldiers immediately pulled out their IDs. "We may not be college students, but we're trained medics. We've saved lives on the battlefield. You think we can't recognize a drowning case?" I turned to Michael, who didn't dare meet my eyes. "Michael Dawson," I said, "you knew it was these women who saved me. And yet you claimed to be my savior. You took advantage of the situation, used it to get close to me, and publicly ruined my reputation to force me into marrying you. What kind of person does that make you?" Mrs. Dawson quickly stepped in front of him, shielding him with her body, ready to argue again, when one of the soldiers cut her off. "I knew it," she said. "I saw it with my own eyes. It was him who pushed her." She grabbed Mrs. Dawson's wrist. "That day, from the truck, I saw Lisa Miller get shoved into the river. And it was by you. You were wearing this exact outfit." For once, Mrs. Dawson looked truly afraid. She covered her face and shrank back into the crowd. "It wasn't me. You're talking nonsense, slandering good people. I'm going to report you to your superiors." She thought the soldiers would be intimidated, but instead they replied in unison, "Great. Let's go. We'll report this together to the police and clear everything up." At that moment, some of the villagers also stepped forward. I remember that day. I did see Mrs. Dawson near the river when Lisa fell in. She really was wearing this exact outfit. "Yeah, I remember that too. She was right there when it happened." Michael stood frozen while the people began whispering again. One of them said, "If the soldier saw it happen herself." "How could you be so sure it was this exact outfit?" someone asked. But now the truth was out. From the very beginning, my fall into the river had been a trap set by Michael Dawson and his mother. Their goal was to make me feel indebted to them, to owe them my life. I slapped Michael hard across the face. "You disgusting pervert," I spat. "You shameless liar." The women around me, furious, surged forward together. Mrs. Dawson, shielding Michael, hurriedly fled the scene but still shouted venomously over her shoulder, "You ungrateful brat. Letting you into our family was the greatest blessing of your miserable life. When my son makes it big, you'll regret it until your guts rot. Without my tuition money, I'd love to see how far Michael gets now." The next morning, I packed my belongings and made my way to the village entrance. In my past life, I had wasted everything in the Dawson household, only to be mocked and called a freeloader. I hadn't had much schooling, but before the drowning incident, I had always worked hard to support myself. Back then, all my dowry had gone toward Michael's education. But not this time. I was going to use it to open a small shop. Yesterday, when I told the female soldiers about my plan, they praised my ambition and promised to ask their superiors for permission to stop by and pick me up on their way to deliver a ceremonial tribute to the city. Just as I was waiting for the truck, fate once again threw me into the path of the Dawsons. Michael and his mother appeared, along with Emily Sullivan, who was now sitting on the back seat of Michael's bicycle. Each of the three wore a different expression, but all were steeped in malice. Mrs. Dawson, having somehow borrowed tuition money, deliberately pulled it out from a well-packed bag and stuffed it back in right in front of me. "Some people," she said loudly, "really think the world can't spin without them. But look at my son. People everywhere want to help him. A man like Michael doesn't need someone like you. You're nothing but an illiterate hen who doesn't know her place. Look at you, standing there with your suitcase. What, regretting your decision and running after us now?" Emily, still clinging tightly to Michael's waist, leaned forward to look at me, her expression smug and superior, just like in my past life. "So, you're Lisa Miller, the little seedling that sprouted in the dirt. Your parents must have never gone to school. Otherwise, why would they give you such a stupid name? In my past life, the day after marrying Michael, Emily had shown up to see him off to school. Back then, she looked like some privileged lady from the old world sizing up her maid. "So you're the pathetic girl clinging to Michael," she had sneered. "You've got that rough country blush. When Michael bought me snow cream, he didn't get you any, did he?" Today, just like before, Michael was wearing a trendy tweed jacket, his single braid black and glossy. I, on the other hand, still had dust on my clothes from cooking early that morning, and I wore a blue scarf Mrs. Dawson had given me, like some ugly duckling catching her first glimpse of a swan. Emily kept talking, her voice loud and cutting. "Oh, I know what snow cream is. Michael said the classrooms get so cold in winter that his hands crack. I walked 25 miles just to bring him a tin of snow cream." But just as I opened my mouth to speak, Michael interrupted. "What could you and she possibly have to talk about? She's a housewife. Trying to explain anything to her is like playing music to a cow. Get on the bike." Emily smoothly hopped onto the back seat of his bicycle. The lunchbox I had prepared with care before dawn was snatched from my hands and stuffed into hers. "It's got your favorite? Fried eggs with sugar." Their open affection made my anger look petty, like I was throwing a jealous tantrum. For the next 40 years, they used the excuse of being old classmates and lifelong friends to repeatedly trample on my dignity. I was just about to retaliate when suddenly a group of village girls swarmed up behind me, all chattering at once. They carried their own luggage. Each one of them had been inspired by my speech yesterday to head into the city with me and chase their own future. Having overheard Emily's insults, they all came to my defense. "So what if you went to school?" one of them snapped. "You clearly learned nothing. Did your parents never teach you how to speak like a decent human being?" "Look at her," another said, clinging to a man like a leech. "Relax, girl. No one here is competing with a dog for its food." Emily's face flushed deep red. "You're all just jealous that Michael and I have a bright future. Not like you lot, who'll spend your whole lives digging in the dirt." I cut her off coldly. "Our chairman once said, 'In a revolution, labor is honorable, and no job is more noble than another.' Are you saying you disagree with the chairman?" Emily trembled in rage. "You're just bitter because Michael dumped you. So young and already obsessed with love, how could people like you ever bring prosperity to this country?" Her words sparked another round of loud rebuttals. "Wow. Look at her twisting things now. My cousin works the counter at the department store. She saw you and Michael holding hands while shopping. I went to that outdoor movie at the county high school. Saw you two whispering off in a corner. I was too embarrassed to even look. Back then, Michael was telling everyone in the village that Lisa was his wife. So what does that make you, huh? A side chick? You're the shameless one." Flustered, Emily tugged on Michael's arm. "Michael, say something." But Michael, instead of defending her, propped up the bicycle and pulled me aside. "Lisa, have you really lived through another life?" His eyes searched mine, desperately seeking confirmation. Unless I had really been reborn, how else could I have changed so drastically from the timid girl he once toyed with? I stared at those anxious eyes, the corner of my mouth curling into a cold smile. "Michael Dawson, you must be starving to death," I sneered. "What nonsense are you spewing about living another life? We don't have any relationship now, so keep your hands to yourself." I yanked my wrist free from Michael Dawson's grip. My tragic past life was his proudest achievement. I would never let him look at me with that same smug satisfaction in this life. I was going to make him see that the 19-year-old Lisa Miller despised him from the bottom of her heart. Michael's face darkened at my answer. He looked hurt, but it didn't last long. He let out a cold snort and said, "Fine. Lisa Miller, you don't deserve the life of a government official's wife. From now on, I'll go my way, and you'll go yours. We owe each other nothing. Just remember, I'm only going to get better from here." He was so sure that, armed with his memories from the previous life, he would soar to even greater heights this time. But why should we owe each other nothing? He still hadn't repaid what he owed me from our last life. Michael started pedaling away with Emily Sullivan sitting on the back of his bicycle. I stepped forward and blocked the front wheel. "Lisa Miller," he said mockingly, "even if you regret it now, it's too late. I cut him off. Give me back the bike. That bicycle was one I had bought for Michael in the past, and not just the bike, I wanted everything back, everything I had ever given him. Give what back? Mrs. Dawson rushed over and shoved me. You were the one who insisted on clinging to my son and gave all that stuff to him. Now you want it back? Don't you have any shame? I grabbed the bike forcefully and pulled it toward me. Emily, sitting on the back, was thrown off with a jolt. You took my things and didn't think it was shameless. But when I take back what's mine, suddenly I'm the one with no shame? I turned to the women around me. Let's go to the Dawsons and get our things back. That's our startup capital for the shop. Without waiting for a response, I shoved Michael aside, jumped on the bike, and crashed through the Dawson family's front gate. The rest of the girls followed, grabbing what they could: sewing machines, towels, soap, rice, flour, cooking oil. Mrs. Dawson panicked at the sight of her home being cleaned out and rushed to stop us, only to be clawed across the face by one of the sisters. You were the one who talked crap to my mother-in-law last time, weren't you? She shouted. You dried-up hag, always running your mouth. Emily was already pale with fear, hiding behind Michael and trembling. Michael tried to maintain composure at first. Real men don't fight with women, he muttered, but after a few punches from the angry women, who were now calling him a heartless jerk and a filthy scumbag, he scrambled away, half rolling, half crawling, to get the village chief. Chief, he wailed, these crazy women are trying to destroy our village's future. Trashing my house is the same as attacking society's progress. Meanwhile, Mrs. Dawson clutched her face, sobbing so hard her nose ran. She pointed at me and screamed. This wretched girl, her father resented my son for not liking her, so now she's come to kill me. I don't care if I die, but my son is a future college graduate. He's going to be an official. You have to help us, Chief. Michael bared his teeth at me. Lisa Miller, you legal illiterate. Stealing things will land you in prison, you get that? All of you will rot in jail. He puffed himself up proudly. Lisa Miller, I don't love you anymore. Either kneel and apologize today, or prepare to spend the rest of your life behind bars. But I didn't react the way he expected. Debts must be repaid. It's only right. I'm taking back what belongs to me. Mrs. Dawson shrieked. Bullshit. You think it's yours, and that makes it yours? What proof do you have? If it's in my house, it's mine. Emily, having recovered a bit of her arrogance, chimed in, pinching her voice. No one is above the law. We'll report you to the police, and when that happens, don't try to act like you're just a poor, ignorant woman. It'll be too late. Even the village chief, who was smoking a cigarette, frowned and looked at me. Lisa, do you have any proof that this stuff is yours? If you can't prove it, this really does count as causing trouble. I replied coolly, Of course I can prove it. I pulled a thick stack of IOUs from inside my coat. The moment Michael saw them, his face turned to stone. I knew you didn't throw them away, he said through gritted teeth. Lisa Miller, you only ever got close to me because you saw I had potential. And now here you are, revealing your true colors. He had always wanted to save face. So every time he asked me for something, sometimes outright, sometimes with subtle hints, he would toss me an IOU afterward, pretending to be generous. Not just anyone gets a Dawson IOU, he once bragged. When I make it big, these will be worth double. They'll be enough to buy your whole life. Back then, I had accepted those IOUs silently to preserve his pride. I would act like I didn't care, toss them aside, and then pick them back up in secret. I didn't keep those IOUs because I expected anything in return. In my past life, I foolishly thought that buying me for a lifetime was the most romantic thing anyone could say. I treated those IOUs like love letters and tucked them away like precious treasures. Now, seeing the notes he'd written with his own hand, even with his rage boiling over, Michael Dawson had no choice but to admit they were real. Mrs. Dawson tried to stir up trouble. Oh, so even educated folks try to get out of debts now? But my one line shut her up completely. The commotion of all my sisters helping me haul things out had shaken the entire village. People gathered in layers upon layers to watch the spectacle unfold. As they saw the flow of items we carried out of the house, more and more villagers began to whisper, so all the stuff in the Dawson house was provided by Lisa. Emily Sullivan, however, looked completely baffled. She grabbed Michael's arm. Michael, what's going on? I thought you said your family came from wealth and legacy? In my past life, Emily didn't find out the truth until Mrs. Dawson passed away, that the Dawsons had always relied on my dowry. But by then, Michael had already become a powerful official, and their life was comfortable enough for her not to care. But now, standing in this bare and empty house, Emily clearly couldn't accept the reality. No matter how Michael explained that he'd definitely get into college and become a top-ranking official, she refused to believe him. As they were arguing, a few male voices cut through the noise. Emily, didn't you say the Dawsons were one of the top families around here? How are they supposed to pay for your brother's wedding looking like this? Emily turned pale instantly. Dad, what are you doing here? Earlier, while we were hauling things out, I'd asked one of my sisters to send word to Emily's father in the neighboring village. The woman who had paraded herself like a swan in front of everyone got slapped across the face by her own father. You disgrace, he shouted. Always putting on makeup and chasing after men. You said there were plenty of promising boys in high school, and this is the one you end up clinging to? A broke loser? I'll beat the stupidity out of you. Emily screamed as her father dragged her by the hair. Michael tried to intervene but was shoved aside and knocked to the ground by the crowd of men from the neighboring village. You've got nothing, and you still think you can get married? What a joke. So much for being educated. Michael sat on the ground, his face swollen and bruised, staring at his now empty home with bloodshot eyes. He glared at me like he wanted to eat me alive. Lisa Miller, he hissed, you blind, idiotic woman. One day you'll fall to your knees and beg me. But I only gave him a cold look and pointed to his pristine army green pants. Take them off. Those pants were made from fabric I had bought and sewn myself. I didn't care if I had to burn them or throw them away. I wasn't about to leave anything I gave to a beast like him. Michael's face turned bright red, whether from fury or shame, I couldn't tell. Lisa Miller, in broad daylight asking a man to take off his clothes? You shameless whore. You belong behind bars. He spit the words out like venom. You filthy degenerate, you should be executed for this kind of behavior. Apparently, he'd forgotten the kind of man he really was in our past life. Sex should have been an expression of affection, but every time I tried to be close to him, he would lecture me with his nose practically touching mine. Do you know how hard it is for the state to produce a college student? Do you know how valuable my experience is? It should be used to build the country, not wasted on the rotting body of a housewife like you. He always sounded so righteous, as if I were some disgusting rat scurrying around in the daylight. But in front of my corpse, yes, my corpse, 60-year-old Michael was passionately working himself into a sweat over Emily Sullivan, moaning baby one minute, grunting my love the next, switching positions over and over like he was starring in some sick performance. The memory of it made me nauseous. Now, looking at this self-righteous man before me, I let out a dry laugh. Keep your mouth shut unless you want to get shot. You think you own the police? When you asked me to make you those army green pants, because all your classmates had them, you didn't seem to think it was shameless then. But now that I'm asking for my own things back, suddenly I'm a criminal? I spoke loudly and clearly, making sure every single villager heard me. Michael Dawson, you go around acting like you're too good for me, but all you ever wanted was to take advantage. You're the real disgrace here, eating from the same bowl you're spitting in. After everything that had happened, Michael's reputation in the village had hit rock bottom. The crowd couldn't stop whispering. So it was Michael asking her for things all along? Wow, always bragging about being educated, but turns out you were begging a girl for pants? Laughter exploded from the crowd. Michael's face turned the color of liver. Under the pressure, he yanked off his pants and shoes, revealing a pair of garishly colored red and green long johns underneath. With a scowl, he hurled the pants and shoes at me and growled, "Who the hell wants to keep anything from a used-up tramp like you? Lisa Miller, let me tell you something. You were nothing but the lowest possible option for me. And I was always a mountain you could never hope to climb." I didn't even bother responding to Michael Dawson's yelling. I just let out a snort of laughter and walked away. I opened a small shop on the edge of the county high school, getting supplies from both the north and south. On opening day, Mrs. Dawson actually showed up to cause trouble, shouting that I was a parasite on socialist society. But the police officer on duty calmly told her, "Ma'am, the country has reformed and opened up. We now encourage private business. If you keep making a scene, we'll have no choice but to take you in." Mrs. Dawson had no choice but to leave, grumbling under her breath, "Such a disgraceful girl, showing your face on the street like that. Let's see what man would ever want you now, and don't come crying to me when no one will take you." She was still dreaming that Emily would get into college. But just as Emily arrived at school, a police car pulled up, sirens blaring. Out stepped her father, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Michael Dawson, you got my daughter pregnant. Today I'm dragging your perverted ass to jail." In my past life this had happened too. Emily got pregnant around this time. Michael was constantly running home to fool around with me while secretly using my money to pay off the Sullivan family and keep the scandal quiet. That was how it never became public. But in this life, without money, the Sullivan family wasn't letting anything slide. I smiled at Mrs. Dawson. "Well, looks like your son's going to college after all. Just a different kind of institution." As my sisters and I cracked sunflower seeds in front of the shop, Michael was dragged into the police car, hands cuffed behind his back. Behind him, Mrs. Dawson screamed and wailed, "It's that slut Emily's fault. My sweet Emily was supposed to go to college." Mr. Sullivan kicked her hard in the head. "Shut up, you old hag." Mrs. Dawson collapsed onto the ground, holding her head in pain, then turned to look at me. "Lisa, I feel dizzy. Sweet child, help your aunt up." It looked like the stroke she suffered in the past life had come early this time. Hearing her plea, I felt absolutely nothing. I spat out a shell from my sunflower seed and said coldly, "You still owe my daughter a life, and all of you are going to pay it back." But to my surprise, Michael was eventually released and even married Emily. Because of Emily's health, she couldn't get an abortion. The Sullivan family didn't want an extra mouth to feed, but they also demanded $50 in bride price. If they didn't get it, they swore they'd send Michael to jail, even if it killed them. Mrs. Dawson was now paralyzed on the bed, soaked in her own waste. Michael was scrambling to borrow money, but creditors surrounded their home day and night. It turned out Mrs. Dawson had mortgaged the house long ago just to scrape together tuition money to save face. "We only lent you that money because we thought you'd get into college," one lender snapped. "But now the whole school knows you knocked up some girl, and they expelled you. What, you think we're going to eat the debt too?" Creditors and the Jang family hounded him like a pack of wolves. Michael's lips were covered in fever blisters from stress. Finally, he came to me for money. My shop was thriving. I didn't even look at him. He just sat outside the door, waiting until I finished counting cash for the night. When he saw the stack of bills in my hand, I could see the regret in his eyes. He couldn't help thinking, why hadn't I been this capable in the previous life? But I always had been. The only difference now was that the road was no longer blocked by that filthy stone in my way. "Lisa," he said, "for the sake of how hard I worked in the past, just help me this once. Look at how much money you've got. I only need half. That's all." I fanned myself with the money in my hand. "Yes, I've got money. But why on earth would I lend it to you?" Michael's breath stank. His face long lost the scholarly charm he once had. Now he just looked like a desperate gambler with nowhere to turn. "Lisa, if you lend me the money, I'll marry you. You don't know what I know, I swear. If I can just get past this hurdle, I really will get into college. I'll walk the path to success, I swear it." Then he actually dropped to his knees in front of me and held up 3 fingers toward the sky. Just then, a loud crack of thunder rolled across the clear blue sky. Michael flinched so hard it looked like he might wet himself. I gave a cold laugh. "See that? Even the heavens can't stand your lies anymore." I slapped his cheek with the money and said, "Michael Dawson, stop dreaming. There's no college, no high office, there's only a pregnant woman and a paralyzed mother in your future. That is your fate." I walked away without looking back. Behind me I heard his bitter sobs. Yes, Michael still married Emily. Then the creditors took the house, and she had to sell off every inch of her inherited land. The 3 of them, Michael, Emily, and Mrs. Dawson, ended up homeless, reduced to crashing in the back room of someone's roadside stall in the village. Michael couldn't bear the hardship. At first, he still clung to his pride, refusing to bow his head. But when his elderly mother was about to starve to death and Emily, hoarse from screaming, kicked him out to beg, and he wound up in front of my store, I could see the wear and exhaustion life had carved into his face. Still, he forced a smile, trying to look pleasant. Straightening his dirty clothes as best he could, he said, "Boss Lisa, I heard from the villagers that you opened a second location. You know, I've got nothing else going on. And I've always been good at math. I could help with accounting. You can pay me whatever you think is fair." He glanced around nervously, then added, "Also, I heard the house you own in the village is just sitting empty. I could let my mother and wife stay there and keep an eye on the place for you. You know, since you never went to school, you might not be great with numbers and this kind of thing. Well, you really shouldn't trust just anyone to handle your accounts." The women who had come out of the village with me, my sisters who had built their own lives in the city, were now glowing with confidence and success. I didn't even look at that filthy beggar. "Get lost. Don't stand in our way, we've got night classes to get to." I walked right past him without sparing a glance. The next thing I heard about Michael Dawson was that he'd lost his mind. He and Emily had gotten into an argument, and he flew into a rage. He stabbed her to death. And when he turned the knife on himself, he was still muttering something about starting over. "Right, he also said something about starting over again to marry you." Lisa, one of the villagers, said, voice trembling. "How does a person just go crazy like that?" I glanced at the wide-eyed, gossiping faces around me and gave a small, calm smile. "Today's my grand opening. Eat, drink, and enjoy yourselves. Let's not talk about bad omens." The clinking of wine glasses rang like wind chimes in the air. I don't know if Michael Dawson ever got that second chance at life again. But I do know that in this life, I will live every day in happiness.